My name is Paula, and I used to also live in the Edinburgh Student Housing Co-op, but don't worry, I'm not going to talk much more about Edinburgh Student Housing Co-op today. I work in renewable energies and green buildings, and live in a brand new housing co-op in Sheffield at the moment.
So I'm Andrew. I also live in this brand new housing co-op, and I help run a new tech startup called Roost, and our work is about trying to rapidly scale up cooperative housing as quickly as possible. We believe it's recently become possible to have something like 1 million housing co-ops in the UK, and we believe that's certainly necessary for ending the housing crisis, and perhaps debatable, but perhaps sufficient for ending the housing crisis as well.
You might wonder what this mysterious thing on our first slide is a mushroom, a real mushroom that grew in our old flat in London, our rented flat. So we found this leak in our old flat and told our landlord about it, but we couldn't actually do anything about it because we were renting. By the time our landlady had then kind of got builders to come around and fix the leak, this mushroom had grown out of our floor in our flat. This is Andrew and me in Edinburgh Student Housing Co-op. Sorry, I promised. But something that would have not happened in a student housing co-op, because you can just go and fix your own problems, whereas if you rent, sorry about my voice, if you rent, you can't just go and fix it.
So at the minute, our kind of day-to-day focus is very much about, we have communities, we have groups of people who are experiencing the housing crisis, and we're very focused on finding buildings for them to make homes. But speaking with Francesco, we've also come around to the thinking that it sort of cuts both ways, and particularly the power structures and radical praxis that's inherent in co-ops are actually like a really plausible mechanism for sustaining the built environment that societies already have, and perhaps decarbonising cities in the future as well. So in this presentation, we kind of want to look at the other way, that perhaps our buildings, perhaps our homes also need cooperation rather than just co-ops needing homes. So this is kind of how we're thinking about it. We've spoken particularly about success stories today, and for instance, Sandford is a really inspiring success story for us, but it took 5 years, and that actually makes it much faster than the median successful housing co-op in the UK. Of the ones that ever move into a home, typically they take over 10 years, and the vast majority of co-ops never find housing. So this for us poses a kind of survivorship bias, and the bar is so high for ever getting into a home that it means that our housing co-ops are both obviously very impressive and to be applauded, but they're also extremely unusual, and we're missing a huge part of the picture. These athletes are inspirational, but importantly, they're also 7 foot tall and have freakishly resilient knees. How do we never see pictures of people not jumping over the bar, and we never see pictures of the normal people in the background. And when I was thinking a little bit about the contribution from Sandford, they were saying there's this process where people move into their home and they go, oh, they finally feel safe and secure. And what we'd argue is maybe we need more of the crash mats. We need a kind of safe, secure space from which people can navigate the world. And if we get confused about thinking co-ops have to be really hard, we forget that the point is this crash mat. The point isn't jumping over the bar. And we want to lower that bar and just have lots and lots of co-ops rather than almost the struggle of creating co-ops. If that has to be your life work to get over it, it's only going to touch a very limited number of lives. So technology's tried to solve this problem, the housing crisis, in a number of different ways, and there's a graveyard of failed attempts at doing this. So technology can be really good, but if it's just grown on the existing power structures and existing housing tenures that we already have, it'll ultimately be very disappointing and fail. So there's an enormous amount of money, hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds, and some fantastic amounts of brain power being poured into this, and it's being wasted because no one's being genuinely creative about how housing works. So there's some interesting stuff trying to optimize social housing, but the problem with social housing isn't a lack of database management software, it's a lack of social housing, and no amount of apps is going to fix that. There's fintech for getting people onto the home ownership ladder, but fintech sort of private mortgage debt through an app is still a bet on house prices, and it's just extending more and more debt to increasingly marginal people. And then there's this particularly annoying category of technology, which I'm going to just loosely call landlord tech, which is when people sort of have a portal by which the person who can push your rent up and evict you now kind of harasses you to give them boiler readings as well. And we kind of collect all of this under the kind of term of like techno-feudalism or neo-feudalism. What I'm not saying is that landlordism and feudalism is identical. I'm saying that the prize isn't kind of slowly iterating and technologically enhancing existing power structures. The prize is potentially, if we can scale up co-ops, making amateur landlordism in the UK be viewed historically as this sort of obviously stupid, weird thing that happened 100 years ago. And as I've sort of suggested, we think that the power of co-ops is a good starting point to kind of achieve that. So we started last year, and in January we moved into our first home, which is in the heart of Sheffield. So we're going to talk a little bit about that building and some of the changes that have happened since the 19th of January when we took it over. The Marples was a historic, very fancy luxury hotel / brothel in the 1800s, and then it got absolutely flattened in the Blitz. They never actually recovered 70 of the bodies in the building, so we have loads of ghost hunters contacting us on Instagram asking to come in, which is a bit strange. It remained a bomb site, and then it was rebuilt first as a sort of punk pub, and then turned back into a hotel, and then student housing, and then any kind of housing. And then through the sort of short-term profit cycle motivations of various operators, increasingly shittier and shittier, smaller and smaller housing for more and more marginalised people. So it's been a luxury hotel, it's been a bomb site, now it's kind of something in between, and this is the sort of Marples, is the name of the building, as we found it as a co-op. When I say bomb site, this is a picture of above our kitchen. So the ceiling tiles are really kind of recurring motif today. You highlighted it at the start of the day. And what we've noticed is that for the last 30 years, it's always been cheaper for estate agents to replace... These ceiling tiles are designed to show when there's a leak, so they discolour when water lands on it. It's always been cheaper to replace the ceiling tile than to fix the leak. And if there is a leak in an area that no private tenant feels personally victimised by, i.e. all of the common space, they are systemically left to go mouldy. So we have a lot of mushrooms in our home once again. And the specific kind of picking up this idea of like buildings needing co-ops rather than just co-ops needing buildings, we wanted to tell like a bit of a story about the heating systems. I don't know if you want to do this in the radiators.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you want to do it?
It's on the slide.
So the heating systems were set to only come out on at very certain times of the day, so 6 to 8 in the morning, and then something like probably 6 to 8 in the evening as well, which actually was obviously supposed to decrease heating usage, but doesn't actually work for most people who live in the building. Some of the people who live on our floor work night shifts, and they come home after 8 and then come home to a cold house. What happens as well is that you pump up your radiator to full when the heating is on, then you're in a really overheated room for a while, and then it gets cold again, so you end up spending, probably like wasting energy because you're doing that. Instead, if you had autonomy over your own heating schedule, you could increase the comfort of the tenants, as well as decrease energy bills.
So this kind of fact that the people who live in a building, call it home, can't talk to their building and can't control it is then compounded by when those radiators are broken by running on full blast and having very low quality valves. It looks cheaper on paper to just give everyone in the building, 48 bedrooms, a small plastic heater, and you also can't open any of the windows because of the ceiling tiles. So all of a sudden you have 48 people drying all of their clothes with a small plastic heater in their room. And the kind of interesting thing there is that's not in fact even cheaper. No one's getting richer from this kind of incentive structure because the ultimate owner of the building is paying for the energy bills. But there's just a failure without the cooperative mechanisms to kind of align things and not damage the building and also kind of have a reasonable standard of life. But the good news is that there's a really beautiful skeleton underneath all of this sort of private rental sector nonsense. So once you peel back the lino and the carpet tiles, and once you take down the suspended ceilings and get the master keys for the windows, if you open the windows in the 5th floor, you can see the Peak District. It's absolutely beautiful building. It was built as a luxury hotel underneath this lino and what I'm now concerned is toxic glue. There's this amazing historical floor. So really the last 2 months has been like a process of complaining and trying to fix big problems, but also a collaborative process of peeling back all the accumulated junk and finding out what is this building, what are we actually living in. There's been a huge amount of surprises and many of them have been positive, if a bit gooey.
So the first thing that we did is we sat down with the tenants and were like, what do you actually want out of this building? How can we make it better? Then we, so some of the things we were doing were painting the walls. As you can see, my suggestion of sexy pink for the walls was rejected. One of our members made us a beautiful lamp here to brighten up the living room. But here, this is some of the actual painting. We kind of came together on our floor, voted on what color we wanted in our living room, bought the color, painted the living room. Really easy, took us less than a weekend, and made the communal space so much nicer. And here you can also see in the middle of the picture one of these office style lights, which is really useful daylight lighting in an office where you have to be really productive all the time, but not so useful if you want to have a really a nice dinner in the evening. It's not very good ambient lighting, so what we did is kind of put some kind of lighting, I forgot what the name for it is. Filter tape over it to make it a bit nicer. I'm going to skip the washing machine thing.
Cool. So I guess what we kind of explicitly claim is that having a community means that the building is in better shape, and being able to, having the power, rather than being a renter with no power, being a member who can make decisions and collectively execute them. That's a much better way of community building. As we were kind of painting our floor, people who've lived in the same building for 3 years and had never spoken to each other suddenly realised that they spoke the same non-English language and then were like visiting each other's floors. We think that's a much better way to build community than, perhaps the more difficult current reality of the only way to build community is through an absolutely brutally attritional 10-year process of asking for money, getting rejected, failing to get sites, etc. There might be a lower bar for cooperative housing. And hopefully we're building momentum. So the reason that Paula and I are maybe a bit stumbly and tired is we actually didn't sleep in Sheffield last night. We slept on the floor of a new housing cooperative, which we just got keys for in London. We've taken over 2 homes in East London. And then announced that yesterday, and we've already been offered a look around a much bigger site in London. So momentum can develop. I think really key to this is understanding how communities form and how this can be good news for our built environment as well as just for the people who benefit from the housing. And we think a lot of the really tough things that we've had to deal with can greater scale and speed of cooperation is perhaps part of the answer to some of the challenges that have been raised today. So hopefully there'll be many more popping up throughout the UK. That's it.